Hello everyone and welcome back to my sewing room. If you're new, my name's Diane and I like to share with you the stories of the quilts that I make. And this week I would like to share with you the story of the Prairie Queen Quilt. Now sometimes when you're watching YouTube videos, you'll see that a video is made from start to finish and there's never any problems encountered. With this one, if you watch to the end, or near the end, you'll see that just like those other videos, it comes together quite easily. It's not a difficult, it is time consuming, but it's not a difficult quilt to make. And all is well with the world. However, if you stay to the very end, you will see that things weren't as smooth as it appears. But anyway, problems were all overcome and I'd like to share this one with you. So we are in the middle of the heat wave. I'm filming this early. I can't face a hairdryer. I apologise for the rat's tails. And there's no fan on, so we'll just crack on and see how far we get before I melt. So I was inspired to make this quilt from this book, Patchwork and Applique. It's a good housekeeping book. It was the first quilting book I have ever bought. And I found this quilt in this book, or a variation of it. And I thought one day I'd love to make that. And this spring was the time that I decided I would make it. And when those quilting tips and tricks were put together in a book in those days, often they didn't give you dimensions of block sizes or cutting instructions. And if you look closely at this diagram here for this Prairie Queen quilt, you'll see that there's just a little diagram and it says join block 1 to 2, then 3 to 10, and then 11 to 12, and repeat. And that's it. There's no sizes. And so I looked at that and I thought I would make it in scraps. I mean, this quilt was originally made in 1910. It's an American quilt, a utility quilt, and made out of shirts and scraps of fabric. And so I thought I would use my smaller pieces of fabric that I had and I would make it. So let me show you how this one came together. So if you look closely at the block, you can see it's a variation of a shoe fly. You've just got these little on point 4 patches here. And so I do process some of my scraps into 3-inch squares. And so I thought that's what I would go for, 3-inch squares. So 3-inch half square triangles, little 4 patch on point and a 3-inch square in the middle. And so all I needed to do really was to figure out the dimensions of the cuts I would need to make to give me these on point 4 patches. And so once I've done that, the rest was plain sailing really. So I want to try and keep it as scrappy as I could, and I also processed some of my leftover pieces of fabric by cutting them the width of this ruler. And this ruler I've had for many years. It has a rubber base. It's great, it doesn't slip around on the fabric, and that is 1 3/8 wide. And so sometimes if I've got smaller pieces of fabric, I will cut lengths of those and store those. So I knew I had some blue of those. So I joined a variety of blue and white strips together, and then I pressed the seam over to the dark side and I made little 4 patches. And if you have a look on this ruler here, you can see that I used the 1-inch guide, lay it flat against the join seam and trimmed. And so I turned it around each way and following that central seam, and so I had a 2-inch square. And then I took some of the scrap 3-inch squares that I had in white and I cut those on the diagonal. But if you have a look in this bottom right corner, you can see I have marked a 3.25-inch square, so 3.25-inch square. It's a little bit tight if you use 3-inch squares for this purpose. I did manage to do it because I had quite a lot, but you do have to use a scant 1/4-inch seam. So if you use a 3 1/4 inch square, you'll have a bit more fabric to play with. So I cut these squares on the diagonal. So then I joined those triangles to opposite sides of the 2-inch square and I pressed those flat and repeated that top to bottom. And if you have a look here on the ruler, you can see that I'm using the 1.5 inch marker line in the center of that ruler just to lay between the 2 blue points, and then I trimmed to 3 inches. As you can see, there is hardly anything there left over. So I would advise, like I say, to use a 3¼ inch square, and you'll have a little bit more fabric to play with. And you'll need 4 of those squares for each of the blocks that you make. And I try to make sure that the blue fabric in those squares all matched. It doesn't matter, it's a scrappy quilt, but I just decided I would do that for this project. And to make the shoe fly, I took a 3-inch square for the centre and a matching 4¾ inch square to form my half square triangles. You do need to have a 4¾ inch white square to sew with that red. So this is the way that I decided I would make my shoe fly for this blocks. So they're all 3-inch squares, and then I just have to lay those little on-point squares in the gaps between, making sure that the blue are all facing the same way. And then I pressed and trimmed that block to 8-inch square. And the only thing I needed to be careful of when I was joining these blocks together is to make sure that I didn't cut off the points while I was joining the seams together. So I always made sure that the blue was facing upwards so I could see that the needle didn't go inside the point. And these seams are scant 1/4 inch seams, and so I decided that I would press them flat for this project because I thought it would give them a little bit more strength, and made sure that I caught all of the ends in when I was joining the blocks together. So then I grouped together little parcels of the 4¾ inch red and the 3-inch square, and then I put little on point 4 patches to go with those. So if you have a look at this little image here, you can see that I decided I was going to make a quilt that was 6 by 6 blocks. So it was going to be a square quilt and there would be 36 blocks in all. And if you're new to my channel, you won't know that this is a new way of working for me. I used to be a monogamous quilter. I would start a quilt, see it through to the end, finish it and start a new one. However, this year life happened and I changed my process of working, and I now have a stack of project boxes, and so to keep me within some sort of boundaries, I'm only allowed to work on 5 projects at a time. And when I want to start a new one, I must finish one of those. It's my self-imposed rule. And so I needed to go and get some more white fabric to finish this lovely project that I wanted to make. And so I went to my local fabric shop. We only have one now. The other one's closed. We had 2. The other one's closed and is now a vape store. So there's a sign of the times for you. So we went and I went to the fabric shop that we have, and they only had 1 bolt of tone-on-tone white in the whole of the store, just 1. What they've said is that the stores in the UK that I shop at are closing down, and they're not going to close down, but they're taking in fabric from all the other ones, so they're not buying new, and they don't know when they're going to receive any more fabric, and they don't know what fabric they will have until it arrives. So that's not very good, is it, if you want to have a particular colour for a particular project like this, white. And so I looked online and I approached Morris Works again. So a few weeks back I'd bought some wadding from Morris Works, and I was really pleased with the service that they gave. Really friendly, very quick service, and the quality was really good of the batting that I bought. And so all I did was I went onto their online store and I just went down all the tone-on-tone whites, and I bought a fat quarter of each of the first 9 that I came across. And it came in this lovely recyclable box, eco-friendly box, and a little handwritten message, which is very nice. I've got to say I have no business connections at all with this company, but they are really lovely, and I have joined their newsletter, and there's some lovely things in there as well. A nice article this week about mindful sewing, so I would recommend it. So, and the quality of the fabric, the cheaper fabric was the cheaper quality, and the more expensive fabric was more, but it's very nice. I was very pleased with it, and so all of it could be used in this lovely quilt. And just a quick note, Morris Works seem to sell their fat quarters in width of fabric, so it's 14 inches deep width of fabric, which is much easier for them to cut as a company, and I should imagine a lot less wasteful, and so it was fine for this project. But bear that in mind in case you want a bigger piece of fabric, but served my purpose really well. So when the fabric arrived, I took out the blocks that I'd made, and I just cut 4 3/4 inch squares to go with those reds that I already had, to make sure I had enough for the half square triangles. And I cut out all the 4 3/4 inch squares that I would need to make the little 4 patches on point for their triangles, put them all together, so everything now was ready apart from the blue and white little 4 patches. And my plan was that when I had a few moments left after working on something else, or when I had some white thread in my bobbins, I would come in and I would make those little blue and white 4 patches. And that's what I did. It took me quite a few weeks, just making a few little squares at a time, but I would complete a block, and every now and again I would put them out on the wall just to see how they were looking and just to see how many I had. And I was surprised really to see how quickly they'd started to come together, and storing it all in one place. It was lovely to pull out that drawer on the day that I wanted to work on that project and see everything all inside. It was like a little box of chocolates, a little treat that I took out and I worked on. And I truly thought that I would complete this project like that, just a few blocks at a time. And then one day I wanted to come in and sew, but I didn't really want to make anything big. I didn't want to work on anything particularly. And so I just thought, I'll just make those little 4 patches. And I put the radio on and I started making those 4 patches, and I made all the 4 patches in one day. I found it really, really calming, lovely, mindful sewing. In fact, I was so relaxed and chilled. I made too many. I've got a pile here, leftovers. But I know where I'm going to put these in another project. I thought I'd make a blue and white quilt. So that's going to go into that, I think. So anyway, while I was making all of those squares, another design came into my head. And I really want to make this one. So I really needed to have an empty drawer. And so I'd made all of those squares, and so it was just now a matter of getting on and putting all those blocks together. So I completed those blue squares, and then I put all of the blocks that I'd already made on the design wall, and as you can see I am just 6 blocks short, and so I made those. And when I'd made those 6, I put them all on the design board, and I had a look at the way that the reds all work together and the little blue on point squares. Just let them settle for a while before I decided how I would arrange them. And so you can see with this image here that all I did was put them in the colour families, so everything that was similar were blocked together in rows. And then after I looked at how I could distribute all of those colours around the quilt, I decided that the best way to make sure that the colours weren't close together or blocked together was to put them in diagonal lines. And so I put that out on my design wall, and I really like the way that that looked. There's no right or wrong way of doing anything like this, but that was the look I went for this particular quilt. And then I looked in my stash for some sashing, and I had this lovely Paisley Paradise. It's a wide back by Henry Glass, but all the colours worked together, so it was different shades of red and white and blue, and I thought that would make a nice sashing. So I don't mind using backing on the front of a quilt, or quilting cottons that were made for the front of the quilt on the back of a quilt. As far as I'm concerned, it's all 100% cotton, it's all hard wearing, and so I do interchange that. I know other people may have stronger opinions on that than I do, but I decided that I would use that fabric. And you can see here that I just cut some 3-inch strips of fabric with a 3-inch white square, and I placed those next to the blocks on the design wall just to see how it would work, and I was happy with that. So I cut my strips into 8-inch lengths, 3-inch wide, and I joined to the right, and then on the bottom I joined a 3-inch white square to that 8-inch strip, and then join that along the bottom. And then I tried that on the design board just to make sure that I was happy with the overall look. So I added the sashing to all of the individual blocks, and then I joined them in quadrants. And then if you have a look on the right image here, you can see that there's a 3-inch border on that left hand side where I had put all of those blocks on that half together, and then I put the border on that left hand side, and then I did the same on the right. I put all of those blocks together and I put the border on the right hand side. Then I joined those two pieces together and put a border on the top and the bottom. And I thought I'd use this lovely wide back, sort of a wine red with a cream, a vintage looking backing to go on the back of the quilt. And so I just sandwiched everything together and I started to quilt it on my domestic sewing machine. And I used the design of the block as the guidelines for my quilting. So I went on the diagonal corner to corner, and I went across each of those 3-inch squares, point to point. And I like a traditional crosshatch in a quilt like this. I think it looks nice, it's fitting with the design, and it holds everything together nicely. And if you recall, at the beginning of this video I did say things went wrong, and I will share that with you now. But if you're only interested in creating a quilt like that, you don't have to watch the end. So the intention for this quilt for me was to put it in my folksy shop, and so I put my label on the back, and then the next thing I would have done was taken some nice little shots of the quilt in the garden ready for the photographs. I did take a lovely photograph, as you can see, but that's not the whole story of this quilt's little life so far. During the making of this quilt, my machine, my trusted, lovely old workhorse of a machine that I'd had for a long time, was giving up the ghost. So if you have a look at this image here, you can see there's a little burn mark, and what had happened in the manufacturing of this sewing machine, there is a fault because the tension on the cotton eventually, you won't believe it really that cotton can do such a thing, but eventually it wears a channel in the plastic and it snaps then. Every time the cotton goes down through the machine, it snaps under tension. And so I discovered what the problem was. Like I say, I loved my machine and I really didn't want to lose it or stop and buy a new one. And so I tried to fix it. So I used a little welding hot iron and I melted the plastic to try and smooth out that little ridge that had formed, that little gully, and then I put some super glue on and it worked okay for quite a while, and then again under tension it started to snap. So I fixed it a couple of times, but I did buy another sewing machine. I did try and get a plate to replace that, but I just couldn't get one anywhere. And so I bought a new model of the sewing machine because I knew that they had upgraded that fault. So inside now, instead of the thread going next to a piece of plastic, it's going next to a little metal bar, and so that should be okay for many years to come. That's what I was hoping. So I'd started quilting this, and I was about a quarter of a way through when the thread just kept on snapping on my old machine, and so I knew that I had to just swap machines over, and so I did that. Everything seemed fine. I knew the machine very well, so I just started sewing and it was all right. So if you have a look here, I was doing almost finished the quilting, and if you have a look here, you can see, follow the quilting down, that central thread, follow it down, follow it down, follow it down, and stop. Now look at the tension. Can you see that? So you may be thinking that a bad workman always blames his tools, and there might have been some of that. It was very hot, but I never noticed. I never noticed that problem with the tension, so I had to unpick all of the quilting, 3/4 of it. What had happened, I discovered much later, was that the bobbin case was faulty in this, and so the thread kept on slipping out and then it would slip back again. So when I checked the tension on the quilting, sometimes it would look all right and then it would miss and then it would be all right again, and so it was easily missable. On the back you couldn't see any problem at all with the tension, so I was working that way, and so I had to unpick the whole of the quilting practically. Little sore fingers, but that's what I had to do. Luckily I had my old faithful sewing machine, and so it was just a case really of swapping over those bobbin cases and putting the old one into this new machine, and everything now works beautifully. So no problem with the machine, but I sort of lost faith in the quilting on this quilt. I became a little bit paranoid, and so what I did was I went over some of the stitching again with my new machine just to make sure that nothing would come undone. And if you look really closely at the stitching on this red, you'll see that there are a couple of lines of stitching in white, so you can see where I've gone over just to make sure that this quilt will hold together. And so I have checked and double checked and checked again, and this quilt is never ever going to fall apart because of that tension in the quilting. Oh, I don't know. Sometimes these things happen to us quilters, don't they? Not very often, thankfully, but it did. And so what I decided to do was, I didn't want to put it in my folksy shop because there are occasionally 2 rows of stitching on the quilting. But I've washed this quilt and I've dried this quilt and I've tugged this quilt, and it's not going to fall apart, but it is beautiful and it's got beautiful fabrics in, and it took me a lot of time and it's very lovely. And so what I decided to do was to make another label. So I've put the Project Linus label over the top of my label, and this one now will find a home with someone that will love it, I'm sure, because it's only us quilters that notice little things like a double row of stitching on the quilting, and if you're cuddling up to this, I'm sure you wouldn't notice. So that's where this quilt will go, and that's the full story of this quilt, warts and all. And If you are still with me, thank you very much for your company, and I hope that you don't encounter things like that very often, but if you do, walk away. Take some deep breaths before you return and sort it out. It's always worth sorting it out or giving it to someone else who will sort it out for you if you couldn't bear to. So enjoy your stitching, and I will see you again soon. I'm going to be working on this Asian-y inspired one. There's something at the bottom that you can't see. It's a bit of unusual thing that happened with that, but I'll share that with you soon. That is another Project Linus. I've just got to put the batting together for that. So enjoy your sewing, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.